All right, econ students, hope you're ready for today's lesson. So there is going to be, after the lesson, there is a Ed puzzle video that I'm going to want you to do. And if you've never done an Ed puzzle video, I'll walk you through that at the end of the lesson. The lesson though is, the Ed puzzle video is just sort of a wrap up, a conclusion of all the market structures work that we have done. You've done a grid. We did a little bit of a brief assessment just to kind of see where you kids are at with your knowledge of market structures on Friday. And then um, today we're actually going to go a little bit outside of your textbook and do a little bit more advanced. That's not really advanced, but a little bit more than advanced in what your textbook has about market structures and imperfect competition in particular. So we'll go ahead and we'll get into that right now. Don't want to hold you up any longer than I've held you up already. We're going to have to review just a couple things going into this lesson. And again, the purpose of this lesson is to explain how any market that is not a perfectly competitive market does not allocate resources efficiently. Now, we accept that and we allow that as human beings because we feel some advantages in different types of markets, but it is not efficient. And just as a reminder, in a perfectly competitive market, perfectly competitive markets maximize consumer and producer surplus. It's one of the reasons, just one of the reasons that we believe that perfectly competitive markets are the best way to allocate resources the most efficiently. And as a reminder, we have a market demand for a product in a perfectly competitive market, a market supply, and the two intersect at equilibrium where there'll be a market price and a market clearing quantity. And essentially one of the reasons, again, this is such an efficient market structure is because at this market price, you have a lot of consumers who are willing to pay more for the product, but they get to consume it at the market price. So they are realizing what we call consumer surplus. Likewise, you have a number of producers who are willing to produce it for less than the market price, and now they're selling it for more, so they are realizing surplus. So it's just very efficient all the way around. One of the concepts we have talked about in the past was how if the government steps in and tries to put in a price floor or a price ceiling, it takes that efficiency and it really lessens it quite a bit. In this example, this is showing a price ceiling. In terms of inefficiency, it has the same effect as a price floor. It's just when there's a price ceiling, there is typically going to be a shortage of a product. When there is a price floor, there's going to be a surplus. But regardless, what happens when we step in, I should say when the government steps in to set prices either below or above equilibrium, is that it shifts the quantity that's either being produced or consumed. So it's going to shift the quantity consumed or produced less than the original market quantity, and that creates what is called deadweight loss. This was all this area here represented the amount of surplus that producers and consumers experienced at perfect equilibrium. Now all of a sudden, at this price ceiling, our consumer surplus would be represented by this area, and our producer surplus is very, very, very small. And so we have lost this efficiency. And again, that's just a little bit of a review. The second piece of review that I want to go into is the idea of the theory of the firm. And this is the idea that when we talk about like market demand and market supplies, particularly in perfectly competitive markets, we are talking about tens upon tens or hundreds even of producers that are producing and hundreds, sometimes thousands of consumers who are consuming. The theory of the firm is looking at how does an individual firm decide how much to make in a perfectly competitive market. We know how in general the market quantity is established, but how does each individual firm determine how much quantity to make? And so the theory is that firms want to typically maximize profits. And the idea is that firms maximize profits where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And just to remind you what that means, marginal revenue is the additional amount of revenue that a product brings when a firm chooses to sell it on the market. In a perfectly competitive market, a firm is a price taker. So every additional item that they sell is going to give them the exact same amount of revenue of that product's price that they are selling it for. So for example, I have just some batteries laying around. If I am a battery maker, now batteries aren't produced on a perfectly competitive market, but just roll with me here. If I was making batteries and producing a battery, and we'll say the market price of batteries is $3. All right, if I choose to make this battery, I am getting a revenue of $3. That's the amount of money that I am getting when I sell this battery. $3. That's my marginal revenue. That's the additional revenue I made when I created this battery. If I make another battery and sell it on the market, I am getting $3 because again, that is the market price. I am getting $3 to sell this battery. All right, that's the marginal revenue that this battery is bringing in. If I make another battery and sell it on the market, the marginal revenue, guess what? Still $3 because every battery I sell, I'm going to get $3. That's the market price. Um, so the question then comes, how many batteries should I produce at $3 a battery? And that's where marginal cost comes into play. So I am going to produce as many batteries as I can whose marginal revenue is greater than its marginal cost. So if it cost me $2 to make this battery, or we'll just say $1. If it costs me $1 after I pay my workers, I pay my electric bills, all that stuff, my fixed costs, my variable costs, if it costs me just $1 to make this battery, I will make it. All right, because it's going to get me a marginal revenue of $3. It only cost me $1, so I am making two more dollars than I could have by making this battery. All right, if I choose to make another battery, and this battery is going to cost me, we'll say $2.50 to make. And the idea is that as I make more and more batteries, my marginal costs will go up because of the law of diminishing marginal returns. We're not going to go back and review that right now. But again, it's going to cost me a little bit more to hire more workers to make more batteries. Those workers are going to start getting in each other's way in the short run, and they're not going to work as efficiently. So it's going to cost me more to have to make an additional battery. So this battery might cost me $2.50 to make. So again, that's its marginal cost. That's the additional cost that it's making, that it's causing me to make this additional battery. But I can still get $3 for it on the market. That's the marginal revenue. So my marginal revenue is $3. It's only costing me $2.50. So I'm going to make this battery because I'm still making money. Now let's go to this third battery. To make this third battery, again, my marginal costs are going up. I need to hire more workers. Those workers aren't as efficient as before. They're getting in each other's way because I can't increase the land and capital and all that stuff. So to make this battery, it's going to cost me $3.50. That's its marginal cost. I can only sell it for $3. So I'm not going to make this battery. This is going to vanish. Whoops, just disappeared. Look at that, it's magic. Um, because it doesn't make any sense for me to make a battery for $3.50 if I'm only going to be able to sell it for $3. That's just silliness. All right. So again, that's the idea of of profit maximization. Sometimes it's also loss minimization. But long story short, I know too late. I say that all the time, and then I talk forever. Um, Firms will maximize profits and determine what to produce based on the equation of marginal cost equaling marginal revenue. And as a reminder, when we graph a marginal cost curve, it is always going to look like this in an economics graph, at least the economics graphs that we are using in our very basic economics class here. It's sort of like a check mark. And what this is showing is as firms make more and more products, initially the marginal cost, the additional cost for each product is getting smaller because of something we call economies of scale. At one point, though, there is going to be what we call the law of diminishing returns will set in, which is what I just described when we talked about the batteries. And at this point, to make more and more products, each additional product is costing us a little bit more to make because we are not making them as efficiently as before. All right, so as a reminder of what this looks like in a perfectly competitive market, and these two graphs can be a little bit confusing, I understand, but on the left, this is a perfectly competitive market. We'll say it's a perfectly competitive market for wheat. Let's say this is the wheat market. And this over here, this represents the huge demand for wheat and the huge supply. These are thousands of consumers wanting to consume wheat. These are tens upon maybe hundreds of producers willing to produce wheat. All right, this is the market. And at this market, we find equilibrium where demand and supply intersect. And at that equilibrium point right here, we find a market clearing price and a market clearing quantity. All right, now, when we move over to the theory of the firm, what we're going to look at is how does an individual firm, and it's kind of deceptive because it looks like these two things are the exact same size. This is just one firm among many firms. So this is a huge, this represents the entire market. This is just one little itty bitty firm in that market. And that firm in the market, it is what we call a price taker. So it has to take the market price. So we'll say the price again is $3. All right, it has to take this $3 market price. It cannot change the price of the product. This is going to be the price that consumers are going to consume their product. So in other words, this is a perfectly elastic demand curve for a perfectly competitive market. This is showing the demand that the small number of people that this small firm has in this huge market to sell products. This is the demand that people have. People are willing to buy this product for $3 and $3 only. If a farmer tried to sell his or her wheat for $4, these consumers would say, forget that, I'm going down the road and I'm getting it for $3 because that's the market price. I'm not buying your $4 wheat. That's just silliness. All right, and we'll review again, but this is going to be the same thing as the firm's marginal revenue. So because this is a perfectly elastic demand curve, this is the price that a firm can sell its product. Each additional product that is being produced on this for this product is going to bring in $3 of revenue. And when we add a firm's marginal cost curve, we can find what we call the profit maximization point, where marginal cost intersects or equals marginal revenue right here. And that is the quantity this firm will produce at, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Because at every other point before, and it doesn't even really matter what these numbers are, it's just sort of conceptual. So for three products, if this was 3 products of wheat, a firm could produce 3 products. Their marginal cost is less than their marginal revenue, meaning it's only costing them like $2 to make this product. They're going to earn $3 on the market, so they're going to make it. And at every quantity, at every quantity leading up to this point, the marginal cost is less than the marginal revenue. Now, every point beyond this, the marginal cost, just like my third battery in my example, the marginal cost is higher than marginal revenue. All right, so this is how a firm in a perfectly competitive market will determine market quantity. And just to reiterate what marginal revenue is and why marginal revenue in a perfectly competitive market is always the same thing as a product's price. In the example before, we were taking the idea of wheat, and it doesn't matter what quantity a firm produces in a perfectly competitive market, that firm has a market price, which is $3. So if a firm produces 1 bushel of wheat, they are going to have 1 bushel of wheat. That 1 bushel of wheat will bring in $3 a piece, 1 times 3, so that's a total revenue of $3. If they add an additional bushel of wheat, that additional bushel of wheat is also being sold at $3. So now they're selling 2 bushels of wheat, $3 a piece, so they have a total revenue of $6. So to add that one additional unit, the revenue went from $3 to $6. Again, a change of 3. So that additional product, that one additional product brought in $3 additional of revenue. So that the marginal revenue of this one additional product is $3. And you can kind of see it makes sense. If a firm instead sells a third product, so they sell all 3 products at $3 a piece, their total revenue is $9. So by adding this additional product, this firm's revenue went up by $3, and that's all marginal revenue is. It's the amount of revenue adding an additional product brings in. We're bringing in $3 additional. So marginal revenue for this third product is $3. So you can see that marginal revenue in a perfectly competitive market for a firm is always going to equal the price. Now this is where things get a little bit more complicated. And this is why any market that is not perfectly competitive is not an efficient market in terms of resource allocation. In a monopoly or any market that has monopoly power, like monopolistic competition, even oligopolies, a firm is going to have a downward sloping demand curve because particularly in a monopoly, the firm is the market. The market demand and the market supply is the monopoly demand and the monopoly supply because in a monopoly there is one producer that produces for the entire market. So this is the market curve as well as the firm's demand curve, which again is very different than a firm in a perfectly competitive market. A firm in a perfectly competitive market has a perfectly elastic demand curve. So let's look at this a little bit closer. We just went over how in a perfectly competitive market, marginal revenue is going to equal a product's price because that is a perfectly elastic demand curve. However, in any sort of imperfectly competitive market that has a downward sloping demand curve, we are going to have a completely different scenario. Because there is a downward sloping demand curve, in order for a firm to sell more products, they have to lower the product's price. There is not a perfectly elastic demand for their product. Let's say that to make one battery, the market demand for one battery is $5. That's how much making one battery will bring me in revenue. So if I make this one battery, I'm going to earn $5. All right, that is different than making 0 batteries in which I'd have $0. So by making this one battery, I have increased my revenue from 0 to 5. So my marginal revenue for this first battery is $5. Now, if I want to sell 2 batteries on the market, because in order to sell 2 batteries, I have a downward sloping demand curve. Because of the law of demand, I have to charge $4 to sell both batteries. Now, I don't know who's willing to buy this battery for $5, who's willing to buy it for 4. I don't know that. So what I have to do, I have to sell both of these batteries for $4. I need to lower my price, not just on the second battery that I'm making, but on the first one that I made as well. So in order to sell 2 products, to sell 2 batteries, I have to lower the price of my product to $4. So now my total revenue is $8. 2 times 4 is $8. So by making this second battery, my revenue went from $5 to $8. So this second battery brought me an additional $3 of revenue. All right. So that's my marginal revenue of this second battery. To make this second battery, I had to lower my price. And when I lowered my price, my total revenue still increased, but it increased by a smaller rate. My total revenue only went up by 3 to make this battery. So hence my marginal revenue for that second battery is $3. And then finally, if I wanted to sell 3 batteries on the market, because I have a downward sloping demand curve, to sell 3 batteries, I have to lower my price to $3. So to sell these 3 batteries, to make sure I sell all 3, I have to lower my price to $3 for each battery. So I sell 1, 2, 3 batteries for $3 a piece. And again, the reason is I don't know, I don't have perfect awareness of who is willing to pay $5 for this one, who's willing to pay $4 for this one, who's willing to only pay 3 for this one. If I want to sell all 3, I have to sell them at $3 a piece. Now in more advanced economics, there are ways that firms have found a way to use what we call price discrimination where they can do that, but in this scenario we're saying we don't know. So we need to charge or sell each battery for $3 a piece. That means that we're going to sell those 3 batteries in total, 3 batteries at $3 a piece. Our total revenue would be $9. So to make this third battery, my total revenue went from $8 to $9. So to make this third battery, it gave me an additional $1 of revenue. So the first battery gave me an additional $5 than I had before. To sell 2 batteries to make our second battery, it's only gonna bring in additional $3. To make a third battery, it's only gonna bring in an additional $1. And as you can see, when we keep doing the math, eventually marginal revenue actually turns negative, where we have to lower the price at such a point that um, we have to lower the price to such a point that we actually decrease total revenue. In other words, in a monopoly or any firm that has monopoly, any market structure that has monopoly power, marginal revenue will always be less than a product's price. So here is what that looks like on a firm's demand curve in a monopoly or in a monopolistically competitive market. Anytime you have a downward sloping demand curve, a marginal revenue curve will look like this. In a perfectly competitive market, they were both perfectly elastic and they were equal. In a monopolistic market, marginal revenue is always going to be less than demand. Now, if this were a perfectly competitive market and we had thousands of producers and thousands of consumers, all right, this blue line would represent supply. Now, in a monopoly, we call this marginal cost. They're not technically the same thing, but for the sake of argument, we're going to say marginal cost and supply are very similar, similar enough that we can call them the same thing. In a perfectly competitive market, a firm would produce where supply equals demand. This would be equilibrium. All right, so if a monopoly wanted to produce what we call the socially optimal point, where they are producing where the supply of society is equaling the demand of society, they would produce right here at equilibrium. However, we know firms want to make profits. And so a firm is only going to produce if they want to maximize profits where marginal cost meets marginal revenue. And that occurs right down here. This is our profit maximization point for a firm in a monopoly market. A firm in a monopoly market is not going to operate where a perfectly competitive market would, which is right here. It is going to produce right here where it's going to maximize profits. It maximizes profits at Q quantity, right where marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect. At that quantity, consumers, that line is a little bit off, but at that quantity, consumers are willing to pay P price up here. So you can see in a perfectly competitive market, consumers would normally pay at a price right down here, and quantity would usually be produced at a little bit of a higher amount over here. But because a firm is maximizing its profits, it is actually going to decrease the quantity on the market, and people are going to have to pay more for that quantity than they would in a perfectly competitive market. And ironically enough, I know there's a little bit more lines in this, it's almost identical to what happens when the government comes in and sets a price ceiling or a price floor. That it's a firm operating a perfectly competitive or in a monopolistically competitive or a monopoly type market structure will produce a quantity less than what equilibrium would be in a perfectly competitive market at prices higher than what you would normally see in a perfectly competitive market. All right, so that is quite a bit of information. And again, the reason that I think it's important that students have a general understanding of this is that almost every market that we have in our world is non-perfectly competitive. It is an imperfectly competitive market. And by nature, imperfectly competitive markets do not allocate resources 100% efficiently. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't good ideas, that markets are awful, but there is a cost to having non-perfect competition. That cost is sometimes the cost of what we call product differentiation. If everybody was willing to buy an homogeneous product, prices would be a lot lower and things would be a lot more competitive. Sometimes the price comes through advertising, which again sort of stems from the homogeneity or I should say the product differentiation of non-perfectly competitive markets. Sometimes that inefficiency it comes through firms that are able to control product information and maximize products, allocate resources in ways that don't necessarily optimize social efficiency. But it is important to understand markets themselves, unless they are perfectly competitive, have some degree, some varying degree of inefficiency. So the things that you will need to take away, if I ever show you a graph that looks like this versus a graph that looks like this, you'll need to know that one is a perfectly competitive market with perfectly elastic demand. I should say a firm in a perfectly competitive market with perfectly elastic demand. The other is a firm in a market with monopoly power and downward sloping demand curve. And just also know that markets, unless they're perfectly competitive, are not 100% efficient. And that's it. So if you are not familiar, if you're familiar with Edpuzzle, know how to do Edpuzzle, you can go ahead and shut it down right now. But if not, there is a Edpuzzle video that I would like for you kiddos to do. It's pretty simple. There is a link in our Google class or on the website, also in our lesson for the day, and it'll take you to a video. You'll watch the video. Along the way there'll be some questions and they're pretty easy questions for this one. There'll be some questions that you'll answer throughout the video, and I think this is a nice video that really sort of summarizes and wrap up market structures. So if you're still having a little bit of a difficult time understanding market structures, hopefully this gives you a little bit more of a concrete idea of what the different market structures are and how they kind of work. The very first two questions are some basic review questions on this. The very last question is an open-ended question, so make sure you answer it completely, and that'll be it. All right. Um, this is a pretty long lesson. Probably won't have quite as long of one tomorrow. I'm thinking about switching things up a bit tomorrow and talking about the economic value of human life. It's kind of deep. Um, and then on Thursday, we're going to hit some market failures. All right. I hope things are going well, and stay tuned for some more economics. And if you have any questions, any problems at all, as always, please reach out. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.